Hey everybody, DJ here. Welcome, and this is going to be a tutorial on how to render gemstones and create dispersion using Blender cycles. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. And just so you know, if you do get lost or you need some help or would just like to be part of our community, you can join the Discord. The link is down in the video description. And if you'd like to donate to help cover the costs of creating these videos, you can also become a patron where you can get project downloads like the project you're going to see in this video and others as well. So let's head into Blender now. And first, what we need to do is we need to establish what it is that you actually have to do before you start doing your materials. And this is a step that a lot of people kind of forget or they don't know about. And I want to sort of let everybody know that this is something that you really should be doing. So the first thing is you need to make sure that the size of your project when you're creating either jewelry or gemstones or something like that, the way that and this applies for cycles and other engines as well, and even if a particular material might try to bypass this, it's important just to have these ideas in your mind about the scale of your project and what the size is for the object you're trying to create. So here in this project file we have a ring that has gemstones. They're basically diamonds all around it, and it's already sort of like created. And again, this is available to people who are patrons. So if you want this particular download file, you can become a patron and download it and start to play with it. Now, the thing is that this particular object needs to be a particular size. A lot of people start to sort of like create their objects at the regular size of their file or the default cube when it opens up, and that's kind of a problem. So, what you need to do is if you do create that in that way, you need to put this or scale it down to the actual real world unit or size that this ring might be. So, to help us out with this, what we're going to do is we're going to go onto the internet, and all you need to do is basically here size of standard. Oops, misspelled female here. Female wedding ring in centimeters. You could also look for millimeters, and you can see here that there are a lot of different sizing charts. And I found a couple, and we can kind of zoom in here, and you can see that the diameter, which is the size from the left to the right of the ring, or the overall width of the ring at any point on the circle, you can see that it's kind of a range from around 14 to 22 millimeters. And what I did is I basically made it 20 because that seemed to be okay as far as the size. But you can check a couple different sizing charts. Like there's this one here. It's a little JPEGy, but you kind of get the idea there. And if we go in here and we actually look at this as far as the scale with this measuring tool here, and we go across like this, you can see that it is roughly around 20 millimeters in diameter from the basically the the diameter of the circle of the ring here for the size. So you can feel free to basically scale this down and do that at your own leisure. Just make sure that you do that before you do any other steps, because a lot of people do forget this. And in order for the light to traverse through the gemstones and be able to be absorbed by volume or anything like that in a realistic way, and this applies for cycles and any other engine, it really does do a proper um, calculation if you have the right size of your overall object. So the next thing you'll really want to do here is you need to make sure that you set up a proper lighting. I do have an HDRI set here in the world settings. So if you look here, I do have a HDRI setting, and I use this Studio Small from HDRIHaven.com. So if you wanted to recreate this exact same scene, you could use that. And I also put some lights in here to kind of exaggerate the sort of brilliance of the ring. So I'm not going to show you exactly how to set up a specific lighting thing or lighting setup like this. It's really up to you when you start to add your materials and everything else to start to add some of these uh, either point lights or area lights, or if you want to use actual mesh lights to set those up in a more realistic way. And that will help to establish the brilliance and the refraction of your glass shader material that you're going to be putting on your gemstones, and we're going to be doing that shortly. But just keep in mind that it's more than just scaling it down and having the right geometry here for your gemstones. You also need to have a good lighting setup as well. Now, one more thing before we get started, and you'll see here that there's a little bit of a funkiness going on with the mesh. And if I select, I'm going to turn on the overlays here. If I take this and I hide it, you can see that there's these little inlets. And basically, a step that you really need to take when you're creating these rings or anything like that, if you just sort of like plop a diamond or a gemstone onto your mesh object, like the ring, will cut right through that gemstone. And how rings are in real life, they have sort of like an inset. So you need to be able to have that gemstone actually sitting inside of something, where it's like carved out like this. And I used a Boolean operation here to create this, but you can do it with a mesh operation where you actually do the hard surface modeling and everything. This is just a quick way to do it without having to have the 100% correct topology. And you can always like move objects around using this method. And I'll just unhide everything so you can kind of see what that looks like. So you can see there's these little pegs that sort of like go into the object. And that's basically creating a Boolean operation to carve out those sections that we saw. So if I hit H here to hide these, and we look at the gemstones here and we hide those, you can see that that is what's happening there. And it's the same thing with the top. This peg right here is basically creating this larger inset here. And if I take the object and I go over to my properties and we look at the subdivision, you can see that it's currently set to a 2 in the viewport. But if you pump this up to a 4 or something like that, you don't really see these sort of like weird mesh anomalies and stuff like that. So it does tighten it up a bit more. And the more correct way to do this is to do it by hard surface modeling and all that kind of stuff. But when you're sort of feeling out something and you're creating something fairly quick, you can end up with a really good result doing this sort of quick method here as well. So I'm just going to hit Alt H to bring everything back, but I'm actually going to hide all of these since they're kind of in the way from what we're trying to look at here. So if I look through the camera view here, and this is where I've set up my composition, and we take a look at the gemstones, I'm actually going to just ignore this right now, and I'm going to create what a lot of people would just start off with, and I'm going to show you what this looks like with just a regular glass shader. So if I'm looking at our material output here, and I just have a simple glass shader, and I look at the rendered view, and what I'm going to do just to make it a little bit easier to see and quicker to render, I'm going to use the crop region to render, or crop to render this region here. And I'm going to select my camera, and we're just going to focus on this particular section right here. We're going to zoom in over there and we're going to take a look at this. So here's what it looks like right now. It's very noisy, which is sort of expected because we have a lot of refraction that's sort of like throwing light all around. And if we look at the actual samples and the light paths that I have here, in the render settings, in order to get a lot more brilliance out of stuff like this, you need to make sure that you have a good amount of bounces. And this might be overkill. You could probably reduce these by quite a bit in some of these areas. But if you want a really easy way to have as much of this as possible, like as brilliant of the image as possible, you'll want to go to the full global illumination, which is a preset that comes with Blender, and it sets all of these. The other thing that you want to do is you might want to change some of these caustic settings or the direct light or indirect light if you want to, but these settings should work just fine for what I'm going to show you. And if we look at the gemstone here, we can see that it's with the glass shader, it's just kind of plain. It's not really that interesting. And if you change the roughness to, something like a 0.05, sometimes you can get a little bit better caustics or something like that. And if you try to change these to, let's say, multi-scatter GGX here for the glass, you can see that it changes it to where it's like a little bit brighter, but it's not really getting the effect we want. And gemstones, especially like diamonds, have a dispersion effect that is not in the cycles presets for these shaders. And you could try to change the coloring here to something else to try and make it more interesting. And you might go, oh, I'll just make this an aquamarine or something because I can't get that dispersion effect. Well, the thing is that if you need to have diamond rings because your client wants there to be diamond rings, or that's what you're trying to create is some sort of like engagement ring set or something like that, having aquamarines or rubies or something like that or emeralds is really not what is standard. It's not what people expect. So how can we get some kind of dispersion effect like what you would see in LuxCore or Octane Render? And if you haven't yet, you could check out the render engine comparisons I did on this specific object to see what those might look like. But let's say you needed to use cycles and you just like cycles. You have to have some sort of different way of representing that sort of dispersion effect. It's not pre-built into this engine with the already preset nodes to allow that to happen like some of the other render engines. So what is it that we need to do? Now, you could create a fresh, from scratch dispersion effect and all that kind of stuff, but luckily for me and for you, there's already a node that's available for free and open for everybody to use and manipulate pretty much as they want. I'm just going to delete this here. And I'm going to show you if we go into the website gumroad.com and you look for jocafa, he's got a couple different things in here and he's given me permission to show you guys how to use this thing. So you can go in here, you can basically put this into your cart and you can give him some money. I would say give him, what, $1 if you want, or if you can afford it, whatever it is that you can afford to give him, or if you just can't afford anything right now, you can put a 0 in there, and then you can add that to the cart and download this, and it's pretty great. And I'm going to show you how well this works with creating the effect that we want with dispersion. And this works for gemstones, it works for glass, it works for crystal, whatever it is that you want. So make sure that you add that to your cart. Throw a dollar or two, or however much, or 100 if you have it, his way, and download this material. So what we're going to do here, instead of basically copy and pasting a project inside of one project to this project, what we're going to do is we're just going to append the material into this session. So if we go up here to File, and then we go to Append, we can actually navigate here to our downloads, and then find that particular file that we want to append. So see right here, it says JCF dispersion. We're going to click on that, or double click on it actually. Then we're going to go into material, and then you can see here it says JCF dispersion material. So we're going to append that. And in here, if you look, there's a JCF dispersion material. Now mine says 01 because I already have a dispersion material, but basically all you need to do is select from here this JCF dispersion material. I'm going to rename this as that. And now we have a new material. So if we click on this and we sort of like zoom around and look at this node setup, it might be a little bit confusing, but we're going to simplify this a little bit so it's easier for us. But if we take a look at this over here, you can see I have these dark ones here, and then I have this one here that's like properly set with a material. So I'm going to hit N here, and I'm going to turn on the overlays, and I'm going to select all of my objects that I want the material to be applied to. And then I'm going to select this one here, the larger one that already had it. Oh, I also have these ones here. And I'm going to hit Control L to link the materials. And now I have the JCF dispersion material applied. You can see here I kind of have an issue because I have these two together. I'm going to ignore those for the moment, and I'll change that when I show you the more final render. But let's just look at this one here. So let's go back to the rendered view, and I'm going to turn this off here for the show overlays. And if we take a look at this, it's got some weird stuff going on. Now, if I zoom in here, you can see that we have a normal set here, and we have this bump texture. Well, we don't really want this, so I'm going to actually disconnect this. And for the geometry, from this geometry node here, take the normal and plug it right into here. And then we're going to take all of this, and we're actually just going to delete that and zoom in here. So what's really wonderful about this particular node set and this shader is that there's some presets that are here on the left, but it has a whole lot of interesting things that you can do with it. I'm just going to sort of walk you through some of this in a very sort of like high level way. I'm not going to talk about the math that's behind it necessarily because honestly, it's not something that I'm really interested in, and I really want something that kind of works and we can push forward to get our render complete. So if we zoom in here, there's a couple things that I want to sort of like prioritize in order for us to adjust so that it's a little bit easier for us to look at this thing as far as a diamond is concerned. And you can look right down here there, and if you compare to the left over here, you can see that there's this greenish color. Take this escape, and basically the escape is the coloring effect that is basically cast when light passes through this object. So if I take the escape here and I change it to a red or an orange or something like that, and I just change this color, you can see that overall the color is changing to a reddish color. And if I take it and change it to a blue, now there's a blue color. And you can have some really cool effects using this, but for our purposes here, we're just going to take the RGB value and we're just going to set it 1, 1, and 1 so that it's just a white color. And if you really don't want there to be a lot of this escape that happens here, you can take the escape threshold and put it to a 0, which will basically not have a lot of that being sort of like cast out from the object, or you can pop this up to kind of whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to put it back to like a 24 or something like that. Now, the next thing here is we have a roughness setting, and since this is a gemstone and it needs to be pretty smooth, I'm going to set this to a 0.01. And you can see here that we get a little bit of a different effect when we change that roughness. So if we pop this up to a zero point 0.1 or something like that, you can see what that does. 0.01, it's a lot more sort of like clear and brilliant as far as the kind of diamond that we're looking at here. Now, the area that a lot of people really want to know about is, okay, cool, I want to see this dispersion effect. And you're already seeing some of that as it is here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to disconnect this right here that says preset. We're going to disconnect this. So we're going to left click, drag that out, and now we have something else that's going on here entirely. Basically, what this does is it will set some presets for what kind of thing you're trying to create. So if you want a diamond preset, you can pop this in here, and it will set the set some of these values in here to what would be more acceptable for a diamond preset. But again, we're just going to remove that and just take a look at this. So the glass color is pretty obvious. We can just change this to something else like a orange or a red or something like that. And you can see it still has sort of a dispersion effect going on inside of the object. And if we compare this to a regular glass shader, you can see that there's really a huge difference between this, and even if we take the same color here, by taking the hex value and pasting that into our glass shader here, and we look from this one to this one, there's quite a bit of difference going on here. Okay, so I'm going to change this back to a white color, and we're going to change the glass color here back to a white color, and there we go. Now, the next thing here is called the spectrum start and the spectrum end. And this basically is going to control how many different colors are in the dispersion effect here. So if I change this to a 620, so the start and end is 620, you can see that it's just this color here. And if I change the end to a 100 and I change the start to a 100, you can see that it does some other things as well. And there's these little numbers that are in the brackets here. And this is what the person who created this node recommends that you use. So if I hit 380 or type in 380 here and then 780 here, we can get a very nice balance of spectrum colors. But you could change this to a 1000 and change this to something like a 1 if you want, but you could see that it really darkens the brilliance of the gemstone. Now, what's cool is that there is a way that you can kind of like bring up the brilliance of this, even if it does seem a little bit dulled out. And that's by taking the boost here and popping that up. So again, there's a little bracket here that says 3 to 5, and that's the recommended. But say you want to really pop it, you can go to 10 or something like that, or 100, and it will change the brilliance of the gemstone to kind of whatever you want. But you have to be careful because you do want to keep this within some sort of realism. Now, if you do decide to like pop it up to a 100 and have this sort of thing, it starts to lose a little bit of its realism. So let's actually use some of the recommended values here. So 380, 780, and then the boost, let's put this back to a 4.9. And here we have this effect here. Now, if we take a look at the desaturate right here, basically, if you look at this, and we're going to zoom in a little bit closer here, you can see that there are all these different colors with the dispersion effect happening. And if you take the desaturate and you put this up to a 1, it actually removes the saturation from, or it removes the coloring effect from it. So it does exactly what it says. It just desaturates that prism look or the dispersion effect and makes it just a white or clear gemstone. And if we take a look at the comparison here, here's the JCF dispersion node and then the glass node, you can see that there still is quite a difference, and one of them might be preferable over the other. So it is worth it to take a look at this and compare if you're not even trying to use dispersion effects. So let's take a look back at the JCF dispersion one here with the cycles input. And make sure that you have this input. Don't use the EV one since we're using cycles here. So if we take a look here at the IOR, this is basically the index of refraction for the glass object. And every sort of water or refractive object has an index of refraction that you can actually look up online and type in the values right here. There are some mathematics that you can do or take a look at some different websites that will talk about how the actual IOR is calculated based on the Abbe number and stuff like that. But we're just going to do a really quick look to see what the IOR is for a diamond. So if we take a look here, go into Google search and look for IOR of diamonds. you can see right here 2.418. So if we take that value and we put that right in here, 2.418, there we have the new refraction of that object. And you can see it does look quite different. So if we take this, I'm going to copy this value and we put in a 1 point, let's say 45, you can see that the way it's being calculated is quite different. So let's take the desaturate here, put it down to 0 because we do want that refraction, and let's just take a look at this Abbe number here. So for the Abbe number here, basically the lower the number, the more sort of refractive it's going to look. And the higher the number, let's say we put it to a 50, the more it's going to be sort of like not as obvious. There still are refractive elements that you're seeing here, but it's a little bit smaller. And if we zoom in really, really close, you can see the different colored pixels that are being rendered here. And if we take the number and we just kind of put it to a 10 or something like that, you can see that now you're starting to see more of the sort of rainbow look of the dispersion effect right there on the object. So you can play with these numbers and sort of get a number that feels good to you or something that you like. A lot of times when we're making things in CGI, we want to create something that's better than realistic values. But what you could always do is take a look online and go look for the Abbe value of diamonds. You can see here it says something like this, 55.3633. So see crystals here, there's the Abbe number. So if we copy that and paste that right in there, that should be a generally realistic value. And if we take the diamond preset here and pop it into here, there may be a little bit of a difference because of some different calculations, but you can see that it's roughly similar and we're getting a decent value. So to finish this up, I basically just went in and I applied the correct materials to the gold bracket parts here and made sure that the diamonds all had the right materials applied to them. And now we're looking at the entire rendering scene here. And I'm just going to turn off the overlays. And if I click on the ground, you can see right here, I basically just used a black base and just made this very, very shiny so that you can see the reflected bottom of the ring right there. And this is a very standard sort of way of setting up this type of scene for rendering rings and stuff like that for, display. And if we go ahead and change up our render settings here, if you go to sampling, you can see I put in 1028. And if you want, you can turn on adaptive sampling, set this number pretty low because you don't really want to have too much of a grainy or noisy final image here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on the denoising data right here so that we can see what this looks like. And we're going to do two different renders. We're going to do one with just a regular glass shader right here. And we're going to compare it with the JCF dispersion, and we're going to see how that looks in comparison, and hopefully one is going to be more impressive to you than the other. So let's go ahead and do a quick render of this scene. Okay, so here are the results, and I'm just going to tell you that I did change a couple things about this render, and I'm going to show you what they are first. So if I go in here, this is basically a lot of the settings that I did for the actual render engine comparison. So you can see here there's a couple different settings for some of the boost values and all that. So you can feel free to copy those if you'd like. I use a regular glass shader to check against the basically this dispersion node that we're using here. And also you can see very clearly in this final render that this actually has the proper gold and metal materials that I used for the render engine comparison that you can check out on the channel. One other thing that I did here is I changed the render samples here to 5100. The adaptive sampling was sent to this value here. And I did use a denoiser, so that's why you do see that it's a little bit cleaner than maybe what you have if you do not have the denoiser active. So if we take a look at this here, you can see that basically we have the regular glass shader going on. Here's the time here, 11:07. And it looks all right. It's just it doesn't have that cool dispersion effect. Now if we go to the second slot here and we take a little zoom in here, you can see that the dispersion effect is now active. And this is with that roughly 55 value. And you can see up here with the time, 7 minutes, 19 seconds. So it actually rendered faster using this node setup and using this dispersion effect than it did with the regular glass shader. So that's pretty cool. So not only are you saving time on your renders, but you're also getting the super awesome uh, dispersion look here. Now, I also did one other one where if I go to slot 3, I actually changed the Abbe value to a 5 so that it's a lot more obvious what's going on, just to show you that if you didn't like the other setting that we did here with the sort of like more realistic, you could say, dispersion effect, you could bump up the value. And by bumping up the value, I mean actually reducing the value to make it more obvious. You can make a more clear dispersion effect. And maybe if you liked these, how these are looking, but you don't like quite how this one's looking, you could do two different materials and sort of mix and match them together to get whatever it is that you're really looking for. So that's pretty much how to more easily add dispersion for your glass and jewels inside of cycles. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications on when new videos have been released. And again, if you are interested in offsetting some of the cost of the videos, please consider becoming a patron. You will get the project download with all the cool materials and stuff that you saw in this render and all the other final renders that we did on this project. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.